Welcome back to College Football Addiction. I've got Allie Peak, a peek inside Gators football, talking a little bit about this Florida-Kentucky matchup this weekend. Allie, a little bit of a split mood maybe after Tennessee. I know that none of us like moral victories, but it almost feels like you hate the result, maybe hate some of the decisions that were made, but still appreciate the effort, appreciate the way that the guys played. How weird is it to kind of be in that split mood reality right now?
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing because I felt like we were so good and so bad in the same game, if that makes sense. Like, I have not seen Florida have that kind of effort this entire season. It felt like everybody 100% left it out there, but then it also felt like we lost because we shot ourselves in the foot. So it's such a weird, I don't know, kind of place to be in because you were this close, but the reason you didn't get it were mostly self-inflicted. So I don't know. Weird vibes for sure.
Second time in less than 12 months, you see your starting quarterback go down with a season-ending injury, and obviously it sucks what has happened to Mertz for now a second year, somebody who kind of came in and did everything right, proved everybody wrong, including, his own fan base, rival fan bases, the internet, analysts, just essentially everybody.
Yeah.
A little bit more capable backup this year, I think, than in DJ Lagway.
Absolutely.
Who will start this year. He's gotten a lot of experience, as much as I have criticized the way that Napier has given him experience, like it probably ends up being somewhat of a good thing because of how things worked out. Concerns with him playing, like confidences, like what just thoughts on him starting overall?
So I've probably said this before on your channel, and I know that I've said it on my own, and that is that DJ Lagway has a lower floor than Graham Mertz, but a much higher ceiling than Graham Mertz. So I think what we could see is just the highest of highs and the lowest of lows potentially within the same game, if that makes sense. Graham Mertz had a pretty high floor. He was playing relatively mistake-free football. I know he had that fumble last week against Tennessee, but that's the exception, not the rule when you get Graham Mertz as a player. DJ Lagway, true freshman. I think he is much more likely to produce those ESPN top 10 highlights, but I also think he's more likely to throw an interception, make the wrong read. That has to do with just being young, right? And not having the experience. I do think the amount of experience he's gotten so far this season, he started the whole game against Samford, played at Texas A&M once Graham went down. And then, since then they really have kind of split reps, is going to give him some experience. And it doesn't get any wilder or crazier than Neyland at night. And he handled that, right? And Florida came this close to walking out of there with a win against a top 10 team. So all of that baptism by fire has been good for him because now this is his team.
Do you think, and maybe asking you to guess at what Billy Napier is going to do at any given point of a game or a season is kind of a crazy question, but I'm going to do it anyway. Do you think that they'll be more careful with him? Do you think Napier will try to protect him more?
Yeah.
Or like, the other side of that is like Napier has nothing to lose. Like if you hold him back too much, you might get fired. So like, what are your thoughts there?
It's a balance. And I think whoever the head coach was at this moment would be in the same situation. So it's not just a Napier issue, but I do feel that Coach Napier tends to be more conservative than most coaches. So the odds that you get a well, who cares? I've got nothing to lose attitude is probably pretty slim. He is a conservative play caller by nature. I do think he will want to protect DJ, at least to a certain extent. And, maybe that's good and maybe it's not. We're going to find out, essentially. Aiden Warner's who will be the backup. And then after him, I couldn't even necessarily name who that would be. So, you don't want to lose Lagway by any means. But if you put him in too much bubble wrap, do you take away what makes him DJ Lagway, which would be my concern. You want him to have that option to take off with his feet. You want him to be able to make those spectacular plays. And I hope we don't lose that ability, but I understand it's a tough situation to be in when you don't have a whole lot of viable options behind him.
On the other side of the ball, UF's rushing defense was really bad to start the year and then has very much improved. They only gave up a little over 100 yards against UCF, a little over 150 when you take sack yardage out against Tennessee, and really two of the top 10 rushing attacks in the country in those two teams. I'm sure UF fans still have nightmares of Kentucky going for over 300 last year, but just Kentucky's run game, against UF's run defense, are you concerned there? Flashbacks from last year, think UF's turned a corner? What do you think about that?
I think UF's defensive line looks like they've turned a corner. I don't know that it's TBD on whether or not Florida's entire defense has turned the corner. I think if you rewatch that Florida-Tennessee game, you will see that Florida's DBs let Tennessee's wide receivers behind him somewhat frequently last Saturday night, and Nico just couldn't hit him, and so I think maybe that makes the defense look a little more stout than it actually was when you look at it closely. But Florida's D-line was great. They have improved so much. That was the weakness of a defense that wasn't good. So really not good, right? When you're the weak link on a weak defense. But they're the strong suit at the moment. The defensive line it's like they found that next gear. They've got motors going constantly. They're flying around. They're a little bit chippy. They seem like they are playing with purpose now. And that is absolutely not something we would have said a couple of games into the season. So I like what they're doing so far. I don't know that I think Kentucky has as good a run game as Tennessee and UCF has had. And Florida's had no issues shutting both of those run games down. Tennessee didn't win because they ran all over Florida, so I am cautiously optimistic and kind of buying this defense at the moment.
You have struggled with some injuries, and then obviously outside of the big one to Mertz. Seems like they're getting more healthy, at the right time. I know that Montrell went down in the game as well, but they're getting wide receiver talent back. They're getting offensive line talent back. They've gotten defensive guys pretty healthy. Seems like health-wise, again, as healthy as you can be without your starting quarterback, right? And then a top running back that went down last week too. Seems like they're fairly healthy. I mean, at this point of the year, halfway through, you're going to have injuries, right? Yeah. So thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are relatively healthy. Obviously, it really stinks to lose Graham Mertz. From a player and a person point of view, this was somebody that was a vocal leader on the team, somebody that played relatively mistake-free football. And it's a gruesome injury, and you hate to see it. And Johnson was just running like a man on fire on Saturday night before he went down with his injury. And so those are, Moten went down as well. And those are things that are kind of in the forefront of our mind. But if you look at the roster overall, Florida is relatively healthy, and it's pretty deep into the season for that to be the case. So, I guess that's a positive, but you're starting a freshman quarterback, from here on out. So still a little dicey.
So, we'll talk about what the game may mean for Napier. I mean, I think, it's pretty obvious like where things seem to be trending there, but what the game could mean specifically. But the game within the game, how much does the matchup with Stoops kind of worry you? I mean, they nearly beat Georgia. They did beat Ole Miss, but then they did lose to Vandy. I guess Vandy maybe deserves a little more credit than I'm giving them at that point. But just thoughts on that matchup, and does that concern you much?
Stoops is a great coach, and I think he's somebody who his name gets mentioned for even bigger jobs on a regular basis. He's kind of got it made at Kentucky, though, so there's not a whole lot of reason to look elsewhere. But I think him still being the coach at Kentucky is a choice, not like, okay, this is as big a program as you are capable of coaching. He could probably coach at a lot of places, and he's had Florida's number. We went 31 straight years beating Kentucky, and now at this point, they've beaten us 3 in a row. They've beaten us 4 out of the last 5, I believe. And that's with Stoops at the helm. He knows what he's doing. He always has stout defenses. He has incredibly physical teams, and he's had Coach Napier's number. So that's always going to concern me.
I also wonder if, just the style of the way that they play. Like, I remember watching that Ole Miss game, and I think at halftime they had over 20 minutes of time of possession in that first half, and they just didn't let Lane's offense get off at all. And then there was enough confidence in the second half to where they pulled off a pretty big upset. And they really controlled the time against Georgia too, and they really are, like, in this day and age of like RPO and up tempo offense. Like they are so old school with like,
yeah, they are. They are
we
old
want to
school
play
hard-nosed football.
yeah, 80s football of ground and pound and run the ball. And I wonder how that kind of factors in. Does Napier try and counteract that by speeding things up? Does he think like, okay, well, let's just limit possessions on our side too, to have less potential mistakes from a true freshman? Or, I think that kind of game within the game, like it's certainly Kentucky wants to slow this down as slow as they can and have 40 minutes of possession, which if they do, they're going to win the game, like against anybody they play. But I wonder about that too, just what the pace looks like. I mean, the over under I think is like 44. I actually like the over in it, but is this high scoring, low scoring? Like, how does that all kind of work out? I think that's kind of probably going to be pretty telling. If they can get this game, if the over hits, I kind of like Florida. If the under hits, I think Kentucky probably wins it.
Yeah, I kind of think that there's a good chance that Napier wants to slow it down as well. Napier, can you point to a single game? I mean, we have like the random Mississippi States or Samfords or something, but can you point to a single game where Florida just lights it up continuously, puts lots of points up? Like I think they do kind of like to drag it out. They like these longer possessions. I think Florida's defense is playing in a way where they could be okay to withstand some of that for Kentucky. But, I think the overall sentiment about Kentucky football is that they are a physical team. Stoops always fields physical teams. And that has been a concern for people about the Gators under Coach Napier. Are they tough enough? Are they physical enough to really kind of battle with these tougher SEC opponents? And, the answer has been no a lot during the last 2.5 years. So I'm interested to see, did the defense turn the corner that we think maybe they did the last 2 or 3 games? Because it's gonna need to be true for Florida to win this game. They are gonna need to be more physical and tougher than we have seen them be in the Billy Napier era.
So on Napier, I mean, I know your take all along has been they need to make a bowl, and if they do, he'll probably save his job, and that needs to be where they get to. So I guess I don't need to ask you like, well, what if they lose this? Because obviously, like the games get a lot tougher until maybe the last game of the year. They get a lot tougher after this, right? No shots at Kentucky, but there's a lot of teams that seem like they'd be a tougher matchup for Florida.
An Ole Miss, so like it's not a knock on Kentucky. It's just a tough schedule.
Yeah. So if they're not able to win this one, it seems like he probably isn't going to make it. Now you go upset Georgia, who Mississippi State played well. Yeah, there would be paths, right? They just seem a lot more daunting. Do you think that's something that Florida, does relatively soon with a bye coming up? Do you think that's something that they probably aren't going to cut the cord right now anyway? Just thoughts on what that probably looks like going forward for Napier if they do not win.
So, I was told pretty early on that if he had lost to UCF, that he would be gone right away, right? And that didn't happen. And Florida took care of business. That was a game where they fully felt in control. I know that if you look at the score and you see 24-13, you think like, okay, maybe this was a low scoring battle. It really wasn't. Florida was in control of that game the entire time. I wish they would have put up more points, but they didn't. But that didn't happen, right? And so they beat UCF. They go to Tennessee. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to let them go after Tennessee, even when you lose, because this was a top 10 team at night on the road. You weren't favored. So it's almost a kind of a weird concept. We're going to let go of a coach when he did all the things that we said he was going to do. We thought they were going to lose to Tennessee. And I kind of think at this point, your yardstick, your measuring stick here is whether or not the locker room is still bought in. And at this point in time, this team is 100% still together and still bought in and still playing for Coach Napier. So at the end of the season, if the record isn't what you said the bar needed to be in order for him to earn a 4th year, then I think you cut ties with him and you move on. I think that's likely because I think it's hard to see Florida making a bowl this year. But if they do make a bowl, I do think he gets that 4th year. I just don't know that there's a whole lot of benefit to firing him at this moment versus, a month and a half from now when this team is still behind him. If they weren't, totally different story. You want him out of the locker room. You want an interim head coach in there because you want to try and salvage your relationships with these players and keep them at UF and give them something to fight for. But that's not Florida's reality right now. These players aren't opting out, aren't quitting on him, aren't quitting on each other. They're in fact improving, marginally than they were at the beginning of the season. So even if Florida doesn't win another game, I don't really necessarily see the harm in keeping them on right now, outside of the fact that it's going to drive fans bonkers.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, yeah, fans are going to whine and complain. But to me, I agree. I don't really see where it helps Florida from any perspective outside of the loudest, whiners and complainers just wanting to, like, they'd feel good about firing Napier. Like, the fans would be like, okay, at least we got that done. Yeah. They'd feel good about it 6 weeks faster than it was going to happen anyway. Like, to me, it doesn't help them financially. With the portal and everything, like, how many guys, like, they fire Napier on Sunday morning, right after they lose, right? How many guys jump in the portal that week? Like, there's a ton, I think. I think there's
Whereas you wait to the end of the season, you see who is potentially available. And, if those players just wait a week, they might know who their head coach is, and then they can jump into the portal once they've made that decision. And you save millions of dollars, right? Like, each completed season, that buyout gets lower. So if you make it to December, you owe him less money. That gives you more money for your next coach. And who knows? I, as a Gator fan for life, will never root against the Gators. And if Billy Napier somehow pulls off a, 3-game, 4-game, 5-game tear right here, guess what? He's my head coach for the next year. And that's, just kind of the way it is. I think we all decided that seemed unlikely when they dropped the easier games of the schedule. You made it far more difficult to make a bowl when you didn't beat Miami, didn't beat Texas A&M, lost to Tennessee, because those were the more winnable games. So, I don't know, if you figure out a way to do it the hard way, which Florida does seem to want to do things the hardest way possible always, then you're retained and the money is saved and recruits can want to come and players don't transfer and, just live to see another season.
Do you have a lean in this? Do you have a gut on how this game goes down between Kentucky and the Gators this weekend?
I never like to pick against Florida. It's very hard for me because I want Florida to win every single game they play, right? Kentucky has had Florida's number the last several years. And so until they show me something different, it is hard to fully believe in them beating the Wildcats. They should have every advantage, right? They're at home. It's homecoming. It's a night game in the swamp. That toxic fan base will still fill the stadium up like they always do. We'll sing Tom Petty and, We Are the Boys. And that should be every possible advantage to Florida, right? And, I guess we're going to see. And we're going to see a glimpse into what the future of Billy Napier at Florida could be with DJ Lagway. And maybe it's world beating. Maybe it makes everybody excited to give him another year and see what the possibilities are. Or maybe it, allows us to see all we need to see to move on. But I'm skeptical. I'm cautiously optimistic, but until Florida actually beats Kentucky, I am very skeptical. I would say that the odds are not in Florida's favor.
Yeah, they've surprised me the way they've played the last couple of weeks, and I think that the way that they just went on the road, and I don't even think the Mississippi State game was quite as close as the final was. They played well there. Obviously, they played very well against UCF, although UCF at this point is just floundering. And then the way they played, the team itself. Now again, self-inflicted wounds. The team itself, the way they played against Tennessee. Was encouraging. I think that was really impressive. For the couple of reasons you kind of mentioned, the Napier Stoops thing, I think that's an advantage for them. And I also think that if Mertz was playing, and that's not I think Lagway is going to be amazing and probably a day 1 draft pick. So this isn't a shot at him.
Sure.
If Mertz was playing, I think that Mertz is playing, I think you're like, well, we're scoring at least 24, right? Like we're scoring at least, we might get to 28. We might get even higher than that. Without him playing, it becomes a little tougher to say, like, will the offense be consistent enough to, will Lagway make 2 dumb freshman mistakes, which every other freshman in the country would make too, right? Like it becomes tougher to see. So yeah, I'd probably lean Kentucky too, but at the same time, Florida's impressed me the last few weeks, the way that they've played. If they can get out of their own way, if they can, not coach in their own way too, they'll probably have a pretty good chance. So where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your content?
You can follow me on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it these days, at Allie_Peek, which is Peek, or you can head on over to YouTube, A Peek Inside Gators Football. We've got lots of content this week.
Awesome. Thank you for hanging out.
All right. Thanks. Go Gators.